What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. I realized something today. If you are listening to this podcast, it means that you are a fan of classic literature and listening to things for free and a little bit of personality, a little banter, and you just really enjoy audiobooks. And if that is the case, if all four of those things apply to you, then I think that means we'd be besties. We'd just be very good friends. Just a cheerful thought that I had today. All right, let's get into The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 41, The Presentation. When Albert found himself alone with Monte Cristo, he said, "My dear Count, allow me to commence my services as cicerone by showing you a specimen of a bachelor's apartment. You, who are accustomed to the palaces of Italy, can assume yourself by calculating in how many square feet a young man who is not the worst lodged in Paris can live. As we pass from one room to another, I'll open the windows to let you breathe." The Count had already seen the breakfast room and the salon on the ground floor. Albert led him first to his atelier, which was, as we have said, his favorite apartment. The Count quickly appreciated all that Albert had collected here: old cabinets, Japanese porcelain, Oriental stuffs, Venetian glass, and arms from all parts of the world. Everything was familiar to him, and at the first glance he recognized their date, their country, and their origin. Albert had expected he should be the guide. On the contrary, it was he who, under the Count's guidance, followed a course of archaeology, mineralogy, and natural history. They descended to the first floor. Albert led his guest into the salon. The salon was filled with the works of modern artists. There were landscapes by Dupré with their long reeds and tall trees, their lowing oxen and marvelous skies, Delacroix's Arabian cavaliers with their long white burnouses, their shining belts, their damask arms, their horses, who tore each other with their teeth while their riders contended fiercely with their maces, aquarelles of Boulanger, representing Notre Dame de Paris with that vigor that makes the artist the rival of the poet. There were paintings by Diaz, who makes his flowers more beautiful than flowers, his suns more brilliant than the sun. Designs by de Camp, as vividly colored as those of Salvator Rosa, but more poetic. Pastels by Giraud and Müller, representing children like angels and women with the features of a virgin. Sketches torn from the album of Dauzat's Travels in the East that had been made in a few seconds on the saddle of a camel or beneath the dome of a mosque. In a word, all that modern art can give in exchange and as recompense for the art lost and gone with ages long since past. Albert expected to have something new this time to show to the traveler, but, to his great surprise, the latter, without seeking for the signatures, many of which indeed were only initials, named instantly the author of every picture in such a manner that it was easy to see that each name was not only known to him, but that each style associated with it had been appreciated and studied by him. From the salon, they passed into the bedchamber. It was a model of taste and simple elegance. A single portrait, signed by Leopold Robert, shone in its carved and gilded frame. This portrait attracted the Count's attention, for he made 3 rapid steps into the chamber and stopped suddenly before it. It was the portrait of a young woman of 5 or 26, with a dark complexion and light and lustrous eyes, veiled beneath long lashes. She wore the picturesque costume of the Catalan fisherwoman, a red and black bodice and golden pins in her hair. She was looking at the sea, and her form was outlined on the blue ocean and sky. The light was so faint in the room that Albert did not perceive the pallor that spread itself over the Count's visage, or the nervous heaving of his chest and shoulders. Silence prevailed for an instant, during which the Count gazed intently on the picture. "You have there a most charming mistress, Viscount," said the Count in a perfectly calm tone. "In this costume, a ball costume doubtless, becomes her admirably." "Ah, monsieur," returned Albert, "I would never forgive you this mistake if you had seen another picture besides this. You do not know my mother. She it is whom you see here. She had her portrait painted thus 6 or 8 years ago. This costume is a fancy one, it appears, and the resemblance is so great that I think I still see my mother the same as she was in 1830. The Countess had this portrait painted during the Count's absence. She doubtless intended giving him an agreeable surprise, but, strange to say, this portrait seemed to displease my father, and the value of the picture, which is, as you see, one of the best works of Leopold Robert, could not overcome his dislike to it. It is true, between ourselves, that Monsieur the Count is one of the most assiduous peers at the Luxembourg, a general renowned for theory, but a most mediocre amateur of art. It is different with my mother, who paints exceedingly well, and who, unwilling to part with so valuable a picture, gave it to me to put here, where it would be less likely to displease my father, whose portrait, by Gross, I will also show you. Excuse my talking of family matters, but, as I shall have the honor of introducing you to the Count, I tell you this to prevent you making any allusions to this picture. This picture seems to have a malign influence, for my mother rarely comes here without looking at it, and still more rarely does she look at it without weeping. This disagreement is the only one that has ever taken place between the Count and Countess, who are still as much united, although married more than 20 years, as on the first day of their wedding."
The Count glanced rapidly at Albert, as if to seek a hidden meaning in his words, but it was evident the young man uttered them in the simplicity of his heart.
"Now," said Albert, "that you have seen all my treasures, allow me to offer them to you, unworthy as they are. Consider yourself as in your own house, and to put yourself still more at ease, pray accompany me to the apartments of the Count, my father, he whom I wrote from Rome an account of the services you rendered me, and to whom I announced your promised visit. And I may say that both the Count and Countess anxiously desire to thank you in person. You are somewhat blasé, I know, and family scenes have not much effect on Sinbad the sailor, who has seen so many others. However, accept what I propose to you as an initiation into Parisian life, a life of politeness, visiting, and introductions."
The Count bowed without making any answer. He accepted the offer without enthusiasm and without regret, as one of those conventions of society which every gentleman looks upon as a duty. Albert summoned his servant, and ordered him to acquaint Monsieur and Madame de Morcerf of the arrival of the Count of Monte Cristo. Albert followed him with the Count. When they arrived at the antechamber, above the door was visible a shield, which, by its rich ornaments and its harmony with the rest of the furniture, indicated the importance the owner attached to this blazon. The Count stopped and examined it attentively. "Azure 7 merlets, or placed bender," said he. "These are, doubtless, your family arms? Except the knowledge of blazons that enables me to decipher them, I am very ignorant of heraldry. I, a Count of fresh creation, fabricated in Tuscany by the aid of a commandery of St. Stephen, and who would not have taken the trouble had I not been told that when you travel much, it is necessary. Besides, you must have something on the panels of your carriage to escape being searched by the custom-house officers. Excuse my putting such a question to you."
"It is not indiscreet," returned Albert with the simplicity of conviction. "You have guessed rightly. These are our arms, that is, those of my father, but they are, as you see, joined to another shield, which has jewels, a silver tower, which are my mother's. By her side I am Spanish, but the family of Morcerf is French, and I have heard one of the oldest of the south of France."
"Yes," replied Monte Cristo. "These blazons prove that. Almost all the armed pilgrims that went to the Holy Land took for their arms either a cross in honor of their mission, or birds of passage in sign of the long voyage they were about to undertake, and which they hoped to accomplish on the wings of faith. One of your ancestors had joined the Crusades, and supposing it to be only that of St. Louis, that makes you mount to the 13th century, which is tolerably ancient."
"It is possible," said Morcerf. "My father has in his study a genealogical tree which will tell you all that, and on which I made commentaries that would have greatly edified de Hosier and Jaucourt. At present I no longer think of it, and yet I must tell you that we are beginning to occupy ourselves greatly with these things under our popular government."
"Well then, your government would do well to choose from the past something better than the things that I have noticed on your monuments, and which have no heraldic meaning whatever. As for you, Viscount," continued Monte Cristo, "you are more fortunate than the government, for your arms are really beautiful and speak to the imagination. Yes, you are at once from Provence in Spain. That explains, if the portrait you showed me be like, the dark hue I so much admired on the visage of the noble Catalan. It would have required the penetration of Oedipus or the Sphinx to have divined the irony the Count concealed beneath these words, apparently uttered with the greatest politeness. Albert thanked him with a smile and pushed open the door above which were his arms, and which, as we have said, opened into the salon. In the most conspicuous part of the salon was another portrait. It was that of a man from 5 to 38 in the uniform of a general officer, wearing the double epaulet of heavy bullion that indicates superior rank, the ribbon of the Legion of Honor around his neck, which showed he was a commander, and on the right breast, the star of a Grand Officer of the Order of the Savior, and on the left that of the Grand Cross of Charles III, which proved that the person represented by the picture had served in the wars of Greece and Spain, or, what was just the same thing as regarded decorations, had fulfilled some diplomatic mission in the two countries. Monte Cristo was engaged in examining this portrait with no less care than he had bestowed upon the other, when another door opened, and he found himself opposite to the Count of Morcerf in person. He was a man of 40 to 45 years, but he seemed at least 50, and his black mustache and eyebrows contrasted strangely with his almost white hair, which was cut short in the military fashion. He was dressed in plain clothes and wore at his buttonhole the ribbons of the different orders to which he belonged. He entered with a tolerably dignified step and some little haste. Monte Cristo saw him advance towards him without making a single step. It seemed as if his feet were rooted to the ground, and his eyes on the Count of Morcerf.
"Father," said the young man, "I have the honor of presenting to you the Count of Monte Cristo, the generous friend whom I had the good fortune to meet in the critical situation of which I have told you." "You are most welcome, monsieur," said the Count of Morcerf, saluting Monte Cristo with a smile. "And monsieur has rendered our house, in preserving its only heir, a service which ensures him our eternal gratitude." As he said these words, the Count of Morcerf pointed to a chair while he seated himself in another opposite the window. Monte Cristo, in taking the seat Morcerf offered him, placed himself in such a manner as to remain concealed in the shadow of the large velvet curtains, and read on the careworn and livid features of the Count a whole history of secret griefs, written in each wrinkle time had planted there. "The Countess," said Morcerf, "was at her toilette when she was informed of the visit she was about to receive. She will, however, be in the salon in 10 minutes. "It is a great honor to me," returned Monte Cristo, "to be thus, on the first day of my arrival in Paris, brought in contact with a man whose merit equals his reputation, and to whom fortune has for once been equitable. But has she not still on the plains of Metidi or on the mountains of Atlas a marshal's staff to offer you?" "Oh," replied the Count, reddening slightly, "I have left the service, monsieur. Made a peer at the Restoration, I served through the first campaign under the orders of Marshal Bermont. I could, therefore, expect a higher rank, and who knows what might have happened had the elder branch remained on the throne. But the Revolution of July was, it seems, sufficiently glorious to allow itself to be ungrateful, and it was so for all services that did not date from the imperial period. I tendered my resignation, for when you have gained your epaulettes on the battlefield, you do not know how to maneuver on the slippery grounds of the salons. I have hung up my sword and cast myself into politics. I have devoted myself to industry. I studied the useful arts. During the 20 years I served, I often wished to do so, but I had not the time."
"These are the ideas that render your nation superior to any other," returned the Count. "A gentleman of high birth, possessor of an ample fortune, you have consented to gain your promotion as an obscure soldier, step by step. This is uncommon. Then become general, peer of France, commander of the Legion of Honor, you consent to again commence a second apprenticeship, without any other hope or any other desire than that of one day becoming useful to your fellow creatures. This indeed is praiseworthy. Nay, more, it is sublime." Albert looked on and listened with astonishment. He was not used to seeing Monte Cristo give vent to such bursts of enthusiasm. "Alas," continued the stranger, doubtless to dispel the slight cloud that covered Morcerf's brow, "we do not act thus in Italy. We grow according to our race and our species, and we pursue the same lines, and often the same uselessness, all our lives." "But, monsieur," said the Count, "for a man of your merit, Italy is not a country, and France opens her arms to receive you. Respond to her call. France will not, perhaps, be always ungrateful. She treats her children ill, but she always welcomes strangers." "Ah, father," said Albert with a smile.
"It is evident you do not know the Count of Monte Cristo. He despises all honors and contents himself with those written on his passport."
"That is the most just remark," replied the stranger, "I ever heard made concerning myself."
"You have been free to choose your career," observed the Count of Morcerf with a sigh, "and you have chosen the path strewn with flowers."
"Precisely, monsieur," replied Monte Cristo with one of those smiles that a painter could never represent or a physiologist analyze.
"If I did not fear to fatigue you,"
said Morcerf, evidently charmed with the Count's manners,
"I would have taken you to the chamber. There is a debate very curious to those who are strangers to our modern senators."
"I shall be most grateful, monsieur, if you will, at some future time, renew your offer. But I have been flattered with the hope of being introduced to the Countess, and I will therefore wait."
"Ah, here is my mother,"
cried Albert. Monte Cristo, turning round hastily, saw Madame de Morcerf at the entrance of the salon, at the door opposite to that by which her husband had entered, pale and motionless. When the Count turned round, she let fall her arm, which for some unknown reason had been resting on the gilded door-post. She had been there some moments, and had heard the last words of the visitor. The latter rose and bowed to the Countess, who inclined herself without speaking. "Ah, good heavens, madam," said the Count. "Are you ill, or is it the heat of the room that affects you?"
"Are you ill, mother?"
cried Albert, springing towards her. She thanked them both with a smile. "No," returned she, "but I feel some emotion on seeing, for the first time, the man without whose intervention we should have been in tears and desolation. Monsieur," continued the Countess, advancing with the majesty of a queen, "I owe to you the life of my son, and for this I bless you. Now I thank you for the pleasure you give me in thus affording me the opportunity of thanking you as I have blessed you, from the bottom of my heart." Monte Cristo bowed again, but lower than before. He was even paler than Mercédès. "Madam," said he, "the Count and yourself recompense too generously a simple action. To save a man, to spare a father's feelings or a mother's sensibility, is not to do a good action, but a simple deed of humanity." At these words, uttered with the most exquisite sweetness and politeness, Madame de Morcerf replied, "It is very fortunate for my son, monsieur, that he found such a friend, and I thank God that things are thus." And Mercédès raised her fine eyes to heaven with so fervent an expression of gratitude that the Count fancied he saw tears in them. Monsieur de Morcerf approached her.
"Madam," said he, "I have already made my excuses to the Count for quitting him, and I pray you to do so also. The sitting commences at 2. It is now 3, and I am to speak."
"Go then, and monsieur and I will strive our best to forget your absence," replied the Countess, with the same tone of deep feeling. "Monsieur," continued she, turning to Monte Cristo, "will you do us the honor of passing the rest of the day with us?" "Believe me, madam, I feel most grateful for your kindness, but I got out of my traveling carriage at your door this morning, and I am ignorant how I am installed in Paris, which I scarcely know. This is but a trifling inquietude, I know, but one that may be appreciated." "We shall have the pleasure another time," said the Countess. "You promise that?" Monte Cristo inclined himself without answering, but the gesture might pass for assent. "I will not detain you, monsieur," continued the Countess. "I would not have our gratitude become indiscreet or importunate."
"My dear Count," said Albert, "I will endeavor to return your politeness at Rome, and place my coupe at your disposal until your own be ready."
"A thousand thanks for your kindness, Viscount," returned the Count of Monte Cristo. "But I suppose that Monsieur Bertuccio has suitably employed the 4 horses and a half I have given him, and that I shall find a carriage of some sort ready at the door." Albert was used to the Count's manner of proceeding. He knew that, like Nero, he was in search of the impossible, and nothing astonished him, but wishing to judge with his own eyes how far the Count's orders had been executed, he accompanied him to the door of the house. Monte Cristo was not deceived. As soon as he appeared in the Count of Morcerf's antechamber, a footman, the same who at Rome had brought the Count's card to the young men, and announced his visit, sprang into the vestibule, and when he arrived at the door, the illustrious traveler found his carriage waiting him. It was a coupe of colors building, and with horses and harness for which Drake had, to the knowledge of all the lions of Paris, refused on the previous day 700 guineas. Monsieur, said Monte Cristo to Albert, I do not ask you to accompany me to my house, as I can only show you a habitation fitted up in a hurry, and I have, as you know, a reputation to keep up as regards not being taken by surprise. Give me, therefore, one more day before I invite you. I shall then be certain not to fail in my hospitality.
If you ask me for a day, Count, I know what to anticipate. It will not be a house I shall see, but a palace. You have decidedly some genius at your control.
Ma foi, spread that idea, replied the Count of Monte Cristo, putting his foot on the velvet-lined steps of his splendid carriage, and that will be worth something to me among the ladies. As he spoke, he sprang into the vehicle. The door was closed, but not so rapidly that Monte Cristo failed to perceive the almost imperceptible movement which stirred the curtains of the apartment in which he had left Madame de Morcerf. When Albert returned to his mother, he found her in the boudoir reclining in a large velvet armchair, the whole room so obscure that only the shining spangle, fastened here and there to the drapery, and the angles of the gilded frames of the pictures, showed with some degree of brightness in the gloom. Albert could not see the face of the Countess, as it was covered with a thin veil she had put on her head, and which fell over her features in misty folds, but it seemed to him as though her voice had altered. He could distinguish amid the perfumes of the roses and heliotropes in the flower stands the sharp and fragrant odor of volatile salts, and he noticed in one of those chased cups on the mantelpiece the Countess's smelling bottle, taken from its shagreen case, and exclaimed in a tone of uneasiness as he entered,
My dear mother, have you been ill during my absence?
No, Albert. But you know these roses, tuberoses, and orange flowers throw out at first, before one is used to them, such violent perfumes.
Then, my dear mother, said Albert, putting his hand to the bell, they must be taken into the antechamber. You are really ill, and just now were so pale as you came into the room.
Was I pale, Albert?
Yes, a pallor that suits you admirably, mother, but which did not the less alarm my father and myself.
Did your father speak of it? Inquired Mercedes eagerly.
No, madame, but you do not remember that he spoke of the fact to you?
Yes, I do remember, replied the Countess. A servant entered, summoned by Albert's ring of the bell.
Take these flowers into the anteroom or dressing-room, said the Viscount. They make the Countess ill.
The footman obeyed his orders. A long pause ensued, which lasted until all the flowers were removed. What is this name of Monte Cristo? Inquired the Countess when the servant had taken away the last vase of flowers. Is it a family name, or the name of an estate, or a simple title?
I believe, mother, it is merely a title. The Count purchased an island in the Tuscan archipelago, and, as he told you today, has founded a commandery. You know the same thing was done for St. Stephen of Florence, St. George Constantinian of Parma, and even for the Order of Malta. Except this, he has no pretension to nobility, and calls himself a chance count, although the general opinion at Rome is that the Count is a man of very high distinction.
His manners are admirable, said the Countess, at least as far as I could judge in the few minutes he remained here.
They are perfect, mother, so perfect that they surpass by far all I have known in the leading aristocracy of the three proudest nobilities of Europe, the English, the Spanish, and the German.
The Countess paused a moment. Then, after a slight hesitation, she resumed, You have seen, my dear Albert, I ask the question as a mother, you have seen Monsieur de Monte Cristo in his house? You are quick-sighted, have much knowledge of the world, more tact than is usual at your age. Do you think the Count is really what he appears to be?
What does he appear to be?
Why, you have just said, a man of high distinction.
I told you, my dear mother, he was esteemed such.
But what is your own opinion, Albert?
I must tell you that I have not come to any decided opinion respecting him, but I think him a Maltese.
I do not ask you of his origin, but what he is.
Ah, what he is. That is quite another thing. I have seen so many remarkable things in him that if you would have me really say what I think, I shall reply that I really do look upon him as one of Byron's heroes, whom misery has marked with a fatal brand. Some Manfred, some Lara, some Werner, one of those wrecks, as it were, of some ancient family who, disinherited of their patrimony, have achieved one by the force of their adventurous genius, which has placed them above the laws of society.
You say
I say that Monte Cristo is an island in the midst of the Mediterranean, without inhabitants or garrison, the resort of smugglers of all nations and pirates of every flag. Who knows whether or not these industrious worthies do not pay to their feudal lord some dues for his protection?"
"That is possible," said the Countess, reflecting.
"Never mind," continued the young man. "Smuggler or not, you must agree, mother dear, as you have seen him, that the Count of Monte Cristo is a remarkable man, who will have the greatest success in the salons of Paris. Why, this very morning in my rooms, he made his entrance amongst us by striking every man of us with amazement, not even excepting Chateau Renaud."
"And what do you suppose is the Count's age?" inquired Mercedes, evidently attaching great importance to this question.
35 or 36, mother."
"So young. It is impossible," said Mercedes, replying at the same time to what Albert said, as well as to her own private reflection.
"It is the truth, however. 3 or 4 times he has said to me, and certainly without the slightest premeditation, 'At such a period I was 5 years old, at another 10 years old, at another 12. And I, induced by curiosity which kept me alive to these details, have compared the dates and never found him inaccurate. The age of this singular man, who is of no age, is then, I am certain, 35. Besides, mother, remark how vivid his eye, how raven-black his hair, and his brow, though so pale, is free from wrinkles. He is not only vigorous, but also young."
The Countess bent her head as if beneath a heavy wave of bitter thoughts. "And has this man displayed a friendship for you, Albert?" she asked with a nervous shudder.
"I am inclined to think so."
"And do you like him?"
"Why, he pleases me in spite of Franz d'Epinay, who tries to convince me that he is a being returned from the other world."
The Countess shuddered. "Albert," she said, in a voice which was altered by emotion, "I have always put you on your guard against new acquaintances. Now you are a man, and are able to give me advice. Yet I repeat to you, Albert, be prudent."
"Why, my dear mother, it is necessary, in order to make your advice turn to account, that I should know beforehand what I have to distrust. The Count never plays, he only drinks pure water tinged with a little sherry, and is so rich that he cannot, without intending to laugh at me, try to borrow money. What, then, have I to fear from him?"
"You are right," said the Countess, "and my fears are weaknesses, especially when directed against a man who has saved your life. How did your father receive him, Albert? It is necessary that we should be more than complaisant to the Count. Monsieur de Morcerf is sometimes occupied. His business makes him reflective, and he might, without intending it—"
"Nothing could be in better taste than my father's demeanor, madame," said Albert. "Nay, more, he seemed greatly flattered at 2 or 3 compliments which the Count very skilfully and agreeably paid him with as much ease as if he had known him these 30 years. Each of these little tickling arrows must have pleased father," added Albert with a laugh. "And thus they parted the best possible friends, and Monsieur de Morcerf even wished to take him to the chamber to hear the speakers."
The Countess made no reply. She fell into so deep a reverie that her eyes gradually closed. The young man, standing up before her, gazed upon her with that filial affection which is so tender and endearing with children whose mothers are still young and handsome. Then, after seeing her eyes closed, and hearing her breathe gently, he believed she had dropped asleep, and left the apartment on tiptoe, closing the door after him with the utmost precaution.
"This devil of a fellow," he muttered, shaking his head. "I said at the time he would create a sensation here, and I measure his effect by an infallible thermometer. My mother has noticed him, and he must therefore, perforce, be remarkable." He went down to the stables, not without some slight annoyance, when he remembered that the Count of Monte Cristo had laid his hands on a turnout, which sent his bays down to second place, in the opinion of connoisseurs. "Most decidedly," said he, "men are not equal, and I must beg my father to develop this theorem in the Chamber of Peers."
End of chapter 41. Chapter 42. Monsieur Bertuccio. Meanwhile, the Count of Monte Cristo had arrived at his house. It had taken him 6 minutes to perform the distance, but these 6 minutes were sufficient to induce 20 young men, who knew the price of the equipage they had been unable to purchase themselves, to put their horses in a gallop, in order to see the rich foreigner who could afford to give 20,000 francs apiece for his horses. The house Ali had chosen, and which was to serve as a town residence to Monte Cristo, was situated on the right hand as you ascend the Champs-Élysées. A thick clump of trees and shrubs rose in the center, and masked a portion to the front. Around this shrubbery, 2 alleys, like 2 arms, extended right and left, and formed a carriage drive from the iron gates to a double portico, on every step of which stood a porcelain vase filled with flowers. This house, isolated from the rest, had, beside the main entrance, another in the Rue Ponthieu. Even before the coachman had hailed the concierge, the massy gates rolled on their hinges. They had seen the Count coming, and at Paris, as everywhere else, he was served with the rapidity of lightning. The coachman entered and traversed the half-circle without slackening his speed, and the gates were closed ere the wheels had ceased to sound on the gravel. The carriage stopped at the left side of the portico. 2 men presented themselves at the carriage window. The one was Ali, who, smiling with an expression of the most sincere joy, seemed amply repaid by a mere look from Monte Cristo. The other bowed respectfully, and offered his arm to assist the Count in descending. "Thanks, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, springing lightly up the 3 steps of the portico. "And the notary?" "He is in the small salon, Excellency," returned Bertuccio. "And the cards I ordered to be engraved as soon as you knew the number of the house?" "Your Excellency, it is done already. I have been myself to the best engraver of the Palais Royal, who did the plate in my presence. The first card struck off was taken, according to your orders, to the Baron Danglars, Rue de la Chaussée-Antin, number 7. The others are on the mantelpiece of your Excellency's bedroom." "Good. What time is it?" 4 o'clock. Monte Cristo gave his hat, cane, and gloves to the same French footman who had called his carriage at the Count of Morcerf's, and then he passed into the small salon, preceded by Bertuccio, who showed him the way. "These are but indifferent marbles in this antechamber," said Monte Cristo. "I trust all this will soon be taken away." Bertuccio bowed. As the steward had said, the notary awaited him in the small salon. He was a simple-looking lawyer's clerk, elevated to the extraordinary dignity of a provincial scrivener. "You are the notary empowered to sell the country house that I wish to purchase, monsieur?" asked Monte Cristo. "Yes, Count," returned the notary. "Is the deed of sale ready?" "Yes, Count." "Have you brought it?" "Here it is." "Very well. And where is this house that I purchase?" asked the Count carelessly, addressing himself half to Bertuccio, half to the notary. The steward made a gesture that signified, "I do not know." The notary looked at the Count with astonishment. "What?" said he. "Does not the Count know where the house he purchases is situated?" "No," returned the Count. "The Count does not know?" "How should I know? I have arrived from Cadiz this morning. I have never before been at Paris, and it is the first time I have ever even set my foot in France." "Ah, that is different. The house he purchased is at Auteuil." At these words, Bertuccio turned pale. "And where is Auteuil?" asked the Count. "Close by here, monsieur," replied the notary. "A little beyond Passy, a charming situation in the heart of the Bois de Boulogne." "So near as that?" said the Count. "But that is not the country. What made you choose a house at the gates of Paris, Monsieur Bertuccio?" "I," cried the steward with a strange expression. "His Excellency did not charge me to purchase this house. If His Excellency will recollect, if he will think—" "Ah, true," observed Monte Cristo. "I recollect now. I read the advertisement in one of the papers, and was tempted by the false title, A Country House." "It is not yet too late," cried Bertuccio eagerly. "And if your Excellency will entrust me with the commission, I will find you a better at Enghien, at Fontenay-aux-Roses, or at Bellevue." "Oh, no," returned Monte Cristo negligently. "Since I have this, I will keep it." "And you are quite right," said the notary, who feared to lose his fee. "It is a charming place, well supplied with spring water and fine trees, a comfortable habitation, although abandoned for a long time, without reckoning the furniture, which, although old, is yet valuable, now that old things are so much sought after. I suppose the Count has the tastes of the day?" "To be sure," returned Monte Cristo. "It is very convenient, then?" "It is more. It is magnificent." "Peste, let us not lose such an opportunity," returned Monte Cristo. "The deed, if you please, Mr. Notary." And he signed it rapidly, after having first run his eye over that part of the deed in which were specified the situation of the house and the names of the proprietors. "Bertuccio," said he, "give 55,000 francs to monsieur." The steward left the room with a faltering step, and returned with a bundle of banknotes, which the notary counted like a man who never gives a receipt for money until after he is sure it is all there. "And now," demanded the Count, "are all the forms complied with?" "All, sir." "Have you the keys?" "They are in the hands of the concierge, who takes care of the house, but here is the order I have given him to install the new Count in his new possessions." "Very well," said Monte Cristo. He made a sign with his hand to the notary, which said, "I have no further need of you. You may go." "But," observed the honest notary, "the Count is, I think, mistaken. It is only 50,000 francs, everything included." "And your fee?" "Is included in this sum." "But have you not come from Autiel here?" "Yes, certainly." "Well then, it is but fair that you should be paid for your loss of time and trouble," said the Count, and he made a gesture of polite dismissal. The notary left the room backwards, and bowing down to the ground, it was the first time he had ever met a similar client. "See this gentleman out," said the Count to Bertuccio, and the steward followed the notary out of the room. Scarcely was the Count alone when he drew from his pocket a book closed with a lock, and opened it with a key which he wore round his neck and which never left him. After having sought for a few minutes, he stopped at a leaf which had several notes, and compared them with the deed of sale which lay on the table, and recalled his souvenirs. "Autiel, Rue de la Fontaine, number 28. It is indeed the same," said he. "And now am I to rely upon an avowal extorted by religious or physical terror? However, in an hour I shall know all. Bertuccio," cried he, striking a light hammer with a pliant handle on a small gong. "Bertuccio!" The steward appeared at the door. "Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "did you never tell me that you had traveled in France?" "In some parts of France, yes, Excellency." "You know the environs of Paris, then?" "No, Excellency, no," returned the steward, with a sort of nervous trembling, which Monte Cristo, a connoisseur in all emotions, rightly attributed to great disquietude. "It is unfortunate," returned Monte Cristo, "that you have never visited the environs, for I wish to see my new property this evening, and had you gone with me, you could have given me some useful information." "To Autiel?" cried Bertuccio, whose copper complexion became livid. "I go to Autiel? Well, what is there surprising in that? When I live at Autiel, you must come there, as you belong to my service." Bertuccio hung down his head before the imperious look of his master, and remained motionless, without making any answer. "Why, what has happened to you? Are you going to make me ring a second time for the carriage?" asked Monte Cristo in the same tone that Louis XIV pronounced the famous, "I have been almost obliged to wait." Bertuccio made but one bound to the antechamber, and cried in a hoarse voice, "His Excellency's horses." Monte Cristo wrote 2 or 3 notes, and, as he sealed the last, the steward appeared. "Your Excellency's carriage is at the door," said he. "Well, take your hat and gloves," returned Monte Cristo. "Am I to accompany you, Your Excellency?" cried Bertuccio. "Certainly, you must give the orders, for I intend residing at the house." It was unexampled for a servant of the Count's to dare to dispute an order of his, so the steward, without saying a word, followed his master, who got into the carriage and signed to him to follow, which he did, taking his place respectfully on the front seat. End of Chapter 42. Chapter 43. The House at Autiel. Monte Cristo noticed, as they descended the staircase, that Bertuccio signed himself in the Corsican manner, that is, had formed the sign of the cross in the air with his thumb, and as he seated himself in the carriage, muttered a short prayer. Anyone but a man of exhaustless thirst for knowledge would have had pity on seeing the steward's extraordinary repugnance for the Count's projected drive without the walls. But the Count was too curious to let Bertuccio off from this little journey, In 20 minutes they were at Autiel. The steward's emotion had continued to augment as they entered the village. Bertuccio, crouched in the corner of the carriage, began to examine with a feverish anxiety every house they passed. "Tell them to stop at Rue de la Fontaine, number 28, said the Count, fixing his eyes on the steward, to whom he gave this order. Bertuccio's forehead was covered with perspiration. However, he obeyed, and, leaning out of the window, he cried to the coachman, "Rue de la Fontaine, number 28. Number 28 was situated at the extremity of the village. During the drive, night had set in, and darkness gave the surroundings the artificial appearance of a scene on the stage. The carriage stopped. The footman sprang off the box and opened the door. "Well," said the Count, "you did not get out, Monsieur Bertuccio. You were going to stay in the carriage, then? What are you thinking of this evening?" Bertuccio sprang out and offered his shoulder to the Count, who, this time, leaned upon it as he descended the 3 steps of the carriage. "Knock," said the Count, "and announce me." Bertuccio knocked, the door opened, and the concierge appeared. "What is it?" asked he. "It is your new master, my good fellow," said the footman, and he held out to the concierge the notary's order. "The house is sold, then?" demanded the concierge. "And this gentleman is coming to live here?" "Yes, my friend," returned the Count, "and I will endeavor to give you no cause to regret your old master." "Oh, monsieur," said the concierge, "I shall not have much cause to regret him, for he came here but seldom. It is 5 years since he was here last, and he did well to sell the house, for it did not bring him in anything at all." "What was the name of your old master?" said Monte Cristo. "The Marquis of Saint-Méran." "Ah, I am sure he has not sold the house for what he gave for it." "The Marquis of Saint-Méran?" returned the Count. "The name is not unknown to me. The Marquis of Saint-Méran." And he appeared to meditate. "An old gentleman," continued the concierge, "a staunch follower of the Bourbons. He had an only daughter who married Monsieur de Villefort, who had been the king's attorney at Nîmes and afterward at Versailles." Monte Cristo glanced at Bertuccio, who became whiter than the wall against which he leaned to prevent himself from falling. "And is not this daughter dead?" demanded Monte Cristo. "I fancy I have heard so." "Yes, monsieur, 21 years ago, and since then we have not seen the poor Marquis 3 times. "Thank you, said Monte Cristo, judging from the steward's utter prostration that he could not stretch the cord further without danger of breaking it. "Give me a light." "Shall I accompany you, monsieur?" "No, it is unnecessary. Bertuccio will show me a light." And Monte Cristo accompanied these words by the gift of 2 gold pieces, which produced a torrent of thanks and blessings from the concierge. "Ah, monsieur," said he, after having vainly searched on the mantelpiece and the shelves, "I have not got any candles." "Take one of the carriage lamps, Bertuccio," said the Count, "and show me the apartments." The steward obeyed in silence, but it was easy to see, from the manner in which the hand that held the light trembled, how much it cost him to obey. They went over a tolerably large ground floor. A first floor consisted of a salon, a bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. Near one of the bedrooms they came to a winding staircase that led down to the garden. "Ah, here is a private staircase," said the Count. "That is convenient. Light me, Monsieur Bertuccio, and go first. We will see where it leads to." "Monsieur," replied Bertuccio, "it leads to the garden." "And pray, how do you know that?" "It ought to do so at least." "Well, let us be sure of that." Bertuccio sighed and went on first. The stairs did, indeed, lead to the garden. At the outer door the steward paused. "Go on, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count. But he who was addressed stood there, stupefied, bewildered, stunned. His haggard eyes glanced round, as if in search of the traces of some terrible event, and with his clenched hands he seemed striving to shut out horrible recollections. "Well?" insisted the Count. "No, no!" cried Bertuccio, setting down the lantern at the angle of the interior wall. "No, monsieur, it's impossible. I can go no farther." "What does this mean?" demanded the irresistible voice of Monte Cristo. "Why, you must see, your excellency. cried the steward, "that this is not natural, that, having a house to purchase, you purchase it exactly at Autiel, and that, purchasing it at Autiel, this house should be number 28, Rue de la Fontaine. Oh, why did I not tell you? I am sure you would not have forced me to come. I hoped your house would have been some other one than this, as if there was not another house at Autiel than that of the assassination." "What?" cried Monte Cristo, stopping suddenly. "What words do you utter? Devil of a man, Corsican that you are! Always mysteries or superstitions. Come, take the lantern, and let us visit the garden. You are not afraid of ghosts with me, I hope?" Bertuccio raised the lantern and obeyed. The door, as it opened, disclosed a gloomy sky in which the moon strove vainly to struggle through a sea of clouds that covered her with billows of vapor, which she illumined for an instant, only to sink into obscurity. The steward wished to turn to the left. "No, no, monsieur," said Monte Cristo. "What is the use of following the alleys? Here's a beautiful lawn. Let us go on straight forwards." Bertuccio wiped the perspiration from his brow, but obeyed. However, he continued to take the left hand. Monte Cristo, on the contrary, took the right hand. He arrived near a clump of trees and stopped. The steward could not restrain himself. "Move, monsieur, move away, I entreat you. You are exactly in the spot." "What spot?" "Where he fell." "My dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said Monte Cristo, laughing, "control yourself. We are not at Sartène or at Corte. This is not a Corsican maquis, but an English garden. Badly kept, I own, but still you must not calumniate it for that." "Monsieur, I implore you, do not stay there." "I think you are going mad, Bertuccio," said the Count coldly. "If that is the case, I warn you, I shall have you put in a lunatic asylum." "Alas, Excellency," returned Bertuccio, joining his hands and shaking his head in a manner that would have excited the Count's laughter, had not the thoughts of a superior interest occupied him, and rendered him attentive to the least revelation of this timorous conscience. "Alas, Excellency, the evil has arrived." "Bertuccio," said the Count, "I am very glad to tell you that while you gesticulate, you wring your hands and roll your eyes like a man possessed by a devil who will not leave him. And I have always observed that the devil most obstinate to be expelled is a secret. I knew you were a Corsican. I knew you were gloomy and always brooding over some old history of the vendetta, and I overlooked that in Italy because in Italy those things are thought nothing of. But in France they are considered in very bad taste. There are gendarmes who occupy themselves with such affairs, judges who condemn, and scaffolds which avenge." Bertuccio clasped his hands, and, as in all these evolutions, he did not let fall the lantern, the light showed his pale and altered countenance. Monte Cristo examined him with the same look that, at Rome, he had bent upon the execution of Andrea, and then, in a tone that made a shudder pass through the veins of the poor steward, "The Abbé Busoni, then, told me an untruth," said he, "when, after his journey in France in 1829, he sent you to me with a letter of recommendation in which he enumerated all your valuable qualities. Well, I shall write to the Abbé. I shall hold him responsible for his protégé's misconduct, and I shall soon know all about this assassination. Only I warn you that when I reside in a country, I conform to all its code, and I have no wish to put myself within the compass of the French laws for your sake." "Oh, do not do that, Excellency. I have always served you faithfully," cried Bertuccio in despair. "I have always been an honest man, and as far as lay in my power, I have done good." "I do not deny it," returned the Count. "But why are you thus agitated? It is a bad sign. A quiet conscience does not occasion such paleness in the cheeks and such fever in the hands of a man." "But, your Excellency," replied Bertuccio hesitatingly, "did not the Abbé Busoni, who heard my confession in the prison at Nimes, tell you that I had a heavy burden upon my conscience?" "Yes, but as he said you would make an excellent steward, I concluded you had stolen, that was all." "Oh, your Excellency," returned Bertuccio in deep contempt. "Or, as you are a Corsican, that you had been unable to resist the desire of making us stiff, as you call it." "Yes, my good master," cried Bertuccio, casting himself at the Count's feet. "It was simply vengeance, nothing else." I understand that, but I do not understand what it is that galvanizes you in this manner. But, monsieur, it is very natural, returned Bertuccio, since it was in this house that my vengeance was accomplished. What? My house? Oh, your excellency, it was not yours then. Whose then? The Marquis de Saint-Méran, I think, the concierge said? What had you to revenge on the Marquis de Saint-Méran? Oh, it was not on him, monsieur. It was on another. This is strange, returned Monte Cristo, seeming to yield to his reflections, that you should find yourself without any preparation in a house where the event happened that causes you so much remorse. Monsieur, said the steward, it is fatality, I am sure. First, you purchase a house at Autiel. This house is the one where I have committed an assassination. You descend to the garden by the same staircase by which he descended. You stop at the spot where he received the blow, and 2 paces farther is the grave in which he had just buried his child. This is not chance, for chance in this case is too much like providence. Well, amiable Corsican, let us suppose it is providence. I always suppose anything people please, and, besides, you must concede something to diseased minds. Come, collect yourself and tell me all. I have related it but once, and that was to the Abbé Busoni. Such things, continued Bertuccio, shaking his head, are only related under the seal of confession. Then, said the Count, I refer you to your confessor. Turn chartreux or Trappist and relate your secrets, but, as for me, I do not like anyone who is alarmed by such phantasms, and I do not choose that my servants should be afraid to walk in the garden of an evening. I confess I am not very desirous of a visit from the commissary of police, for in Italy justice is only paid when silent. In France she is paid only when she speaks. Peste! I thought you somewhat Corsican, a great deal smuggler, and an excellent steward, but I see you have other strings to your bow. You are no longer in my service, Bertuccio. Oh, your excellency, cried the steward, struck with terror at this threat. If that is the only reason I cannot remain in your service, I will tell all, for if I quit you, it will only be to go to the scaffold. That is different, replied Monte Cristo. But if you intend to tell an untruth, reflect it were better not to speak at all. No, monsieur, I swear to you, by my hopes of salvation, I will tell you all, for the Abbé Busoni himself only knew a part of my secret. But, I pray you, go away from that plane tree. The moon is just bursting through the clouds, and there, standing where you do, and wrapped in that cloak that conceals your figure, you remind me of Monsieur de Villefort. What? Cried Monte Cristo. It was Villefort? Your excellency knows him? The former royal attorney at Nimes? Yes. Who married the Marquis of Saint-Méran's daughter? Yes. Who enjoyed the reputation of being the most severe, the most upright, the most rigid magistrate on the bench? Well, monsieur, said Bertuccio, this man with this spotless reputation, well, was a villain. Bah, replied Monte Cristo, impossible. It is as I tell you. Really, said Monte Cristo, have you any proof of this? I had it. And you have lost it? How stupid. Yes, but by careful search it might be recovered. Really, returned the Count. Relate it to me, for it begins to interest me. And the Count, humming an air from Lucia, went to sit down on a bench, while Bertuccio followed him, collecting his thoughts. Bertuccio remained standing before him. End of chapter 43.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.